Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Premodern, except this time we're just going to be talking a little bit about Premodern in general, sort of overall what things look like. It's been a little bit since I started doing like the Premodern deck techs and stuff like that, so I was like, oh, I might as well look around, see what's up, see what how the format's evolved since I've been looking at it the last few months or year or something like that. Yeah, about a year, I guess. And so let's go ahead and get started. All right. So I decided to look at TC decks and look at exactly what decks are doing well. And this is a lot of these are just sort of decks that are just showing up. I mean, because a lot of times, a lot of the tournaments, they don't have a ton of people, like 10 to 20 people or something, so they're not very big. So you only have like a limited number of decks. And especially since the format's so new, you have people trying all sorts of stuff out. But these are the decks that are, although it's arbitrary, uh, just that put 10 copies up, uh, or at least 10 lists up on TC decks overall, because you can't really do like, especially with the really small sample sizes and stuff, you can't really sort of figure out like what is. I figured, okay, what we got double digits for. Um, and again, there's some kind of weirdness because like for example, something like survival decks, there's all sorts of different kind of survival decks, and they're all kinds of different archetypes. But they play a lot of the same cards, so I sort of just smashed all the survival stuff together, especially since it's not super obvious what the best survival deck is, but that's okay. So just starting at the top, first thing we got is Sly. A lot of these decks were listed under Sly or Burn or Red Deck Wins. I guess any of these could be appropriate, although the classic Sly lists are just the ones with just like 16 dudes, a bunch of burn spells, and a curse scroll. Um, Red Deck Wins is a lot more control oriented, so it'll have stuff like Pillage main deck or something like that. And then we'll also Waste and Ports. And then we'll also sometimes play like Blistering Firecat instead of Ball Lightning because it's easier to cast. And then, yeah, it's not really burn. I mean, because the deck is classically known as Sly, and it's not really a burn deck, so to speak, like a lightning bolt tribal kind of thing. So we got Sly at 12 copies, not that lot, not that much, which is a little bit surprising. You would think there'd be a lot more, especially with how good the deck is in general. Like if there's any card that feels like unfair, it definitely feels like Fire Blast. Fire Blast is pretty silly, but obviously the power level of a lot of the other cards that are played in it is pretty high. Um, because you have your really aggressive creatures, and then also stuff like Lightning Bolt is really powerful, and then Price of Progress if you play it like main or side or whatever is pretty silly card. Deck has pretty much everything it wants and it has just a bunch of silly draws. And I can understand why people don't play it that much because again, people brewing, maybe it doesn't seem like fun. Um, yeah, so that seems a little strange, especially with how powerful the deck is. And it has answers to all the hate in just a few cards, you know. So it seems strange, but hey, it is what it is. Next, we got Goblins. There's a lot more than I thought there'd be. Obviously, it's a very, very good deck. Like Slide, it's one of the better decks in the format, and plays obviously completely different. Has some slightly more broken draws. Obviously, anything with Goblin Lackey uh, is pretty good. Pretty good. A possible turn 3 kills. Not much more to say here. Basically, sometimes mono red, sometimes red black for like duress and therapy, and then sometimes stuff like living death or patriarch spitting, or maybe even recurring nightmare, oath of ghouls, stuff like that in the sideboard. Uh, yeah, yeah. And then we got land still, 31 copies, the most out of any deck. Um, yeah, again, some of the things about the first three decks is that they're all pretty close to more or less being solved. Uh, Not a whole lot to really tinker with, at least main deck for the most part. a couple flex slots, but not too much to change. They all pretty much play the same. Landstill, again, another great deck, has answers to pretty much everything. I mean, you can pretty much deal with anything, and then post board you get really good hate cards. White and blue has lots of good hate, and of course you got stuff like Tormod's Crypts and Enlightened Tutor for things, and then sometimes like Exalted Angels. Always like Exalted Angels; those are good. So yeah, excuse me. Moving on, we got Survival. A lot of the decks are kind of all over the place, but Full English Breakfast seems to be like the emerging survival deck that's really good. Seems to do pretty well. Not a lot of lists that are super solved. Some play more dreadnoughts and stifles, like 4 dreadnoughts and like 4 stifles, so they can do the friction dreadnought stifle thing, which obviously is pretty strong. Or some only play a couple stifles. Sometimes they play mana leak, as like a lot of older survival decks back in the day did, as counter magic. Sometimes they play Cabal Therapy, and their mana base is kind of all over the place. Sometimes base blue-green, sometimes splashing more colors. But yeah, it does seem like a variant of Full English Breakfast. Seems to be like one of the better versions. So that's pretty cool, because it can do the grindy thing, or it can just do the combo thing with Volrath Shapeshifter and all that kind of good stuff. Next up, we have Enchantress. This one was a little surprising. I didn't really expect there to be so many, but obviously it's a very, very powerful deck. And it's basically, well, it's a kind of like a board control-y, rampy, combo-y kind of thing. Basically just sort of a linear strategy based around enchantments, obviously. Very hard to interact with, because the only creature they play is like Argothian Enchantress. Obviously that has Shroud, so it's harder to deal with. And then obviously just a bunch of enchantments, and there's not a ton of answers for those main deck, although there are some stuff like obviously main deck discard and counter magic, although that's pretty bad versus their draw engine. And even then they still have stuff like replenish to get it back. I guess you do have Disc and Pernicious Deed against them as well. Those are main deckable cards, but also replenish. And then Karmic Justice, of course, is very, very good against decks that play those. So yeah, hard to interact with, very robust draw engine, lots and lots of hate. Pretty sweet deck, I think. And it's good. It's obviously a good deck. Not much downgrading from, say, like the Legacy version of Enchantress. So yeah, it's definitely very powerful. Next up, we got Blue Green Madness, which one of the aggro control decks. Pretty good. I really wish we could play Chromox. That'd make the deck a lot better, since a lot of the spells you want to play cost 2 mana. So giving up a card to jump ahead a turn and really get your game started would be great, but that's okay. Working on some sort of list with Mox Diamond or Lotus Petal. We'll see if I can make that work, but who knows. Anyways, yeah, Blue Green Madness. It's Blue Green Madness. Lots of stuff you can do. Sometimes you want to play more flashback stuff or less flashback stuff. All sorts of good things. Just a good solid deck. It's good, yeah, Madness. And then of course next up is Psychotog. Again, another solid control deck. Not very solved though. I'm not even sure like if you want to be blue black or blue black red. Splashing red for stuff like Fire Ice main deck mostly is pretty sweet, pretty strong. It's a really good card, and it's never dead, which is really nice. Even does nice stuff like taps down blockers, so you can swing with Psychotog. That kind of thing, pretty cool. So yeah, Tog, good deck, strong deck, but I mean, there's all sorts of things. Do you play Burning Wishes or Cunning Wish or neither? Upheaval or Gush or maybe both? I mean, what are you gonna do? Do you gonna play stuff like Nightscape Familiar or not? Do you play Shadowmade Infiltrator or not? So hard to sort of figure out what's the best sort of way to go, but almost all of them seem to play Intuition and AK and counter spells, Duress somewhere in the 75, obviously like 3 to 4 Tog, stuff like that. Definitely a lot of room for growth and innovation there. Next up, we got the rock. These decks pretty much, I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can do it, but they're all like black green, obviously, and play some number of duress and therapy, uh, some number of pernicious seeds, some number of Yavimaya Elder and Ravenous Baloth. Um, and then there's other things like, do you play birds or walls, like Wall of Roots or Wall of Blossoms? Do you play some number of recurring nightmare, like 1 to 2? Do you play wishes? Um, all that kind of stuff. So another good deck, just not a ton of, no real clear best direction. But it can answer most everything, which is pretty nice. That's definitely a good thing to have in a format like Premodern, where it's still like kind of Wild West. You never really know what to expect. And then of course, lastly we have Dreadstill at 11 copies, and well, what's there to say? Most of them are tend to be blue red. I think blue red's the best way to take that deck. Um, and it's basically kind of like a land still sort of thing, but sort of a fish sort of thing too, obviously. And then you got the combo of, well, Phyrexian Dreadnought and Stifle, or Vision Charm and Phyrexian Dreadnought. So that's pretty sweet. Obviously, it's very very powerful. Sometimes you just do the manland thing with, stand still, or sometimes you just go turn to Dreadnought and be like, all right, just deal with it. So that's always kind of cool. Um, yeah, it's a good deck. It's definitely a very powerful deck. You can be grindy, you can be combo-y, you can beat down with triple Cloud Fairies or something. I mean, it's got everything you could ever want. So yeah, these are the decks that are most represented on TC decks, and they have, I think, pretty much most of the big, or most of the events for Premodern listed. So yeah, and nothing here really is too shocking, because these are all good decks. They're not too crazy, not trying to do too much different stuff or whatever. And it's also kind of hard to really get everything represented, because sometimes for example, the land tax scroll rack thing, sometimes that's in its own sort of dedicated deck, like say Parfait. There's not really any Parfait decks up there. I'm the only genius that came up with the Parfait list. Oh my gosh. Um, but there's no Parfait decks, but Parfait would be an example of a dedicated tax rack deck. Sometimes you have the one land tax or whatever in the Enchantress decks. Sometimes you have them meshed with other decks. For example, like I saw an Oath list recently that placed pretty well. I think in Premodern, and it was like an Oath of Druids, like land tax deck. It was like a green-white thing. That was kind of interesting. That was pretty cool. Um, yeah, so sometimes it's just kind of its own thing. Sometimes it's jammed in things. Sometimes you have it in, like, say, like the Terrageddon decks. They'll play Tax Rack in there. So all sorts of different things. But yeah, so it's kind of hard. Sometimes there's just different engines that are in different things, and um, yeah, so that's something to look out for too. But let's move on. Let's move on. Okay, so this is sort of how I would view as like the tier decks. I think I think the first really tier one. These are the things that no one could really be able to disagree with. Sly / Goblins, and then Landstill are pretty much the best decks that you want to be doing stuff if you want to beat down, or if you want to be a control deck. Like, these are the best things to be doing. Um, they're obviously very consistent, or very powerful. Uh, yeah, I mean, there's not much to say. Most of their lists are already pretty well fleshed out. Everyone knows what they're playing, so you don't have like weird stuff where people are trying to find a good list that works kind of for everything. Say something like the Rock, or certain combo decks or whatnot. Um, yeah, these are very consistent. You can always count on them to do good stuff, and something like Sly, you can just cheese wins and stuff by just being like, oh, here's double Fire Blast, like, good game. Or Goblins, if you get an unanswered lackey on turn one, which can occasionally happen, and then that just snowballs, and it's pretty hard to deal with. There's really good hate against these decks, like for example, Chill, Blue Elemental Blast against these decks. but they can obviously answer back with red blasts. And landstill, of course, there's things like Sabo's Web and non-basic hate in general can be a pretty big pain, and it's also pretty dang slow, so that can be an issue. But these decks, by and large, very good. Then you have the next tier down, which I would say that these decks have, I think, are just a little bit worse, or I just don't have enough experience with them, or haven't played that much with them to determine whether they're like as good or not. But again, you got stuff like Tog, Enchantress, the Ancient Tomb based artifact decks, so the Tinker decks or Wildfire or whatnot. Malurin, Full English Breakfast, and other survival decks. The Rock, the Phyrexian Devourer combo decks. Stompy, which I think is only a little bit worse than Sly. I think it's pretty close, and it can have, like, for example, having main deck Enchantment Hate in Druid Lyrist, I believe that's the one, or no, it's Druid Lyrist and Elvish Lyrist. I think they both do the same thing. Uh, but yeah, that's always kind of nice. And his creatures are a little bit better. Stuff like River Boa is pretty good against blue decks, so it's not like 100% worse. I think it's generally worse, but I could think you could make a reasonable case for playing the deck. Of course, Madness, probably one of the better aggro control decks. I think there are certainly others. Reanimator, which I think is probably, it feels like the combo deck that's the best, although it plays pretty similar to like the black-red version from Legacy, where it's very all-in and can't really recover. Like sometimes if they have hate, there's not much you can do. Sometimes your deck just kind of dies, which sucks. And then Dead Guy, black-white aggro control thing, kind of mid-rangey or whatever, etc., etc., etc. Just because I didn't list the deck doesn't mean it's not good, but these are just the ones off the top of my head that I played that I think are pretty solid. Tier 1.5 is basically everything else. There's really not like a huge difference. Like the delta between like the best decks and everything else is pretty small. And then like the tier 2, 4-color control. I don't actually think the deck's particularly good. I don't see really any reason to open yourself up to a lot of non-basic hate and to lose points against the aggressive decks and just all the other decks in general, just because either your mana doesn't line up, or you have to take a bunch of damage from pain lands, or if they bring in non-basic hate, like Blood Moon, Back to Basics, Price of Progress, etc., etc. And of course, just being so much worse versus Wasteland is a pretty big liability. And so I don't really like. I mean, I pretty vocally dislike the 4-color control decks, but it pretty much applies to any really sort of slow, like 3+ color deck, or even some of like the 3-color like aggressive decks like Zoo and stuff. Not always the place you really want to be. I think there's just so very little, not a lot of upside for being a multicolor deck, like more than 2 colors or something. For example, I'd rather just play White Weenie or something like that, or the White Weenie Splash Blue, which I think is pretty good, because Meddling Mage is pretty sweet card. Yeah, so I think you need a good reason to play multicolor decks, especially multicolor control decks, and I just don't see it with the like 3 to 4 color decks for the most part, especially if they have like enemy colors in them, like any of the red, white, blue decks. Like those, you're just taking so much damage from your mana base. Just means like stuff just doesn't line up very well all the time, and I like decks being consistent, and I think the decks that showed up the most, in my opinion, probably one of the reasons is because they are consistent. Like Sly will do the same thing every game. Landstill will do the same thing every game. They have like powerful card advantage engines. Obviously, Sly has stuff like Grim Lavamancer and Cursed Scroll, whereas Blue-White has Standstill, Fact Fiction, Wrath of God, things like that. And Goblins has the entire Goblins deck. So being consistent is good. I think that's just one of the best reasons, one of the main reasons that I think why certain decks are just so much better. So yeah, basically 4-color control would just be any deck that plays just a bunch of basic lands for not a lot of benefit. It's a little different for like say like 3-color combo decks, something like Alurin, because they can end the game on the spot, so taking extra damage isn't a big deal, especially if you're able to play stuff like Wall of Roots, Wall of Blossoms to block and hold the ground literally until you can combo off. So, obviously there's caveats to that, but I generally don't like playing a ton of non-basics and a ton of different colors. So, yeah. Um, oh, and of course, yeah, stop playing Quick Slither and Goblins. That's just like why? Like I keep seeing this, but just stop. Just stop. I see so many bad cards in like some of these decks. It's just like why? I mean, I get people want to play fun decks, but it's just like oh, it's just painful. Just painful. Like why play Quick Slither and Goblins? Just like yeah, just stop. You guys gotta stop. You're killing me here. You're killing me. But in all seriousness, like I said, not a huge difference between a lot of these decks. I think there's a serious cost for adding colors and just a ton of non-basics to decks. Um, and that's obviously not good. Not good. So yeah, yeah. All right, let's move on. All right, so overall, I think red and blue are probably the best colors in the format. Um, I think everything else is pretty close though, but red and blue just have just some of the pretty much the best cards you could ever really need if you want to just play aggressive. You have two different styles for it. If you just want to play like a blue control deck, um, you can play Landstill or Tog. Tog's definitely another good option. Whereas your removal, obviously stuff like Smother and Edict, worse than Plow for the most part. Um, but you have stuff like Duress, which is huge against the other blue decks, great against combo decks. So there's definite upside to being like blue black, base blue black instead of blue white. And of course you just operate on a little bit of a different axis when you're playing Tog as compared to Lane Still. So that's kind of nice. But yeah, I would say red and blue best colors, but everything else is pretty close. Like I don't feel like there's any cards that are too egregious. Like again, sometimes Lackey can snowball, and sometimes Fire Blast like just feels like so unfair. I don't want these cards banned, mind you. I just feel like they're really really like powerful. Yeah, Fire Blast is just stupid. I can't even count how many times it's like okay, I'll just untap or whatever, and then I'll take control of the game. I'll recur my Ravenous Baloth with my recurring nightmare and it'll be sweet and all like whatever, and then it's just you get double fire blasted or fire blast bolt and you're just dead like so that's kind of unfortunate. But everything else I think there's not really doesn't feel like there's any cards that are too egregious off the top of my head. um, yeah, it's the nice thing is you have a lot of really powerful control elements, a lot of hate, really powerful hate in all the colors, which is nice, so nothing really gets out of control. You got pretty good representation between all the archetypes, like aggressive decks, control decks, like permission-based, stack-based control decks. Then you have a ton of different board control decks, and then you have like the aggro control stuff, like Madness or Dread Still's kind of like aggro control. It's also kind of a combo-y thing. And then you have like Roatog, which is seems like it might be an interesting deck to explore. Because there actually were like extended lists that were post rotation of like dual lands and stuff that seem to might have some play to them, kind of interesting. So I'll have to check that out. All sorts of different things. You got Ramp, of course, with like the Tinker or Wildfire decks. They're also the artifact based decks. Off the top of my head, I don't think there's like a non-artifact based ramp deck. Maybe if you count like balancing teams, like the Balancing Act Terravor deck thing that played all the invasion sack lands and stuff, and like some of the Odyssey sack lands, and I guess it plays stuff like Crystal Vein too. Yeah, that'd be an interesting deck. That's kind of like a rampy board control-y combo-y thing. Obliterate into Terravor, but it's a lot worse when you have so much powerful non-basic hate. But that might be an interesting idea. Oh, I guess some of the elves decks, some of the Trinity green decks. There are a couple examples of those. Those can be, I guess, considered like ramp decks. Although elves is more of a tribal thing. But obviously, guys create a whole bunch of mana, ramp into biorhythm, kill your opponent. That's kind of interesting. So I guess there are like um, non-artifact representations for ramp decks. Then you have like a lot of the survival variants, which are like kind of board control, kind of combo, sometimes aggro-y, mid-range-ish stuff. They're kind of all over the place. Um, oh yeah, obviously combo decks. There's a lot of different ones of those. Um, Ramp combo, prison. Yeah, there's a bunch of different prison decks. I guess Enchantress is kind of like a prison thing, in some respects. Then there's, oh shoot, how could I forget? Like Turboland is basically um, like a ramp deck. I'm not a huge Turboland fan either. It felt a little do nothing, but anyways, yeah, and there's a lot of different strategies, but none of them feel like anyone is particularly dominant. It feels like there's just a lot of counterplay to everything, and it's not like a lot of really fast combo decks. So that puts a lot less stress on like the aggressive decks and the control decks and stuff to answer everything in like a timely fashion, which is pretty nice. So that means like you can have decks that are a little bit slower, that are, like a little bit grindier, something like fires or whatever, to be like, oh man, I got all these fatties and stuff. It's not exactly the fastest deck. I mean, it can goldfish on turn 4 if they don't have anything. Uh, but it's so you can have decks like that, and not feel like too punished. Um, yeah, so everything feels pretty good. So yeah, not having the super duper fast combo decks is kind of nice because unlike in Legacy where it's like you have a hard time justifying like playing any of these sort of slower like non-blue decks because you just can't interact fast enough. You need Force of Will or there doesn't really seem to be any Force of Will check decks like Belcher and Legacy, something like that. So that's kind of nice, but yeah. So everything feels pretty good. I mean, it could change, I guess if there's too many. So someone discovers a new archetype or deck or something, um, and it's like, oh boy, this thing's doing too much. The closest thing I could think of would be like the Phyrexian Devourer decks, but they never. When I was playing it, it never felt like it was just like, oh man, I could never lose with this draw. I mean, these decks are so much worse without like Chrome Mox and the broken artifacts to fetch, and even something like Gilded Lotus does so much work in fixing your mana and ramping you. So yeah, yeah. So everything feels pretty good. So let's move on. Let's talk about something I don't really like to talk about too much. Okay, so I kind of lied. It's actually what I don't like to talk about regarding this format. Yeah. So here, let me just one sec. Okay, got my coffee. Everything's good now. It I don't like to really talk about the ban list for the most part too much because the format's not quite even solved. I mean, there's so many different decks that are just still in flux, and there's probably different decks that need to be discovered, I'm sure. I mean, like I mean, I've never seen another domain deck, like in the format at all. Like I'm the only one that came up with the list. Again, pat my own shoulders or pat my own back or whatever. Look, I suck with idioms. Anyways, like I'm taking credit for that. I'm the originator of domain and premodern. That's right. That's gonna be like my thing now. That's what I was gonna say. It's like, oh, you remember that guy with that premodern deck with played domain? That was amazing. Well, that's me, and it's amazing. In all seriousness, like this is just me going through like old standard decks, old extended decks. You can actually there's a on TC decks there's like when you go and search for pre-modern, like on the right hand side, it's like under other. There'll be like different extended formats, and they'll have some of the stuff from like Tempest and Sixth Edition up to like Champions of Kamigawa, and there's a lot of overlap there with pre-modern, and of course like all the old stuff where it's like Fourth and Ice Age and Dual Lands up to like Judgment, I think it was. So you gotta move around between different formats to see what's available. And then you have like all the rules changes stuff, so that made things like Phyrexia and Dreadnought, like the Dreadstill list, viable, made it even a thing. So there's all sorts of brewing space available, and it feels just like a disservice to really start talking about like and foolish really just to start talking about, oh, we need to unban this and that and what the other. I mean, this isn't fucking modern, dude, right? Like if you're looking at the ban list, like there's some retarded shit on there. Like no one's gonna be like, maybe if we unban necropotence everything will be okay. It's not a good idea. It's not a good idea. Like I don't think that's just retarded, right? Like no one's thinking, yeah, we need to unban Necro. Yeah, maybe something good will come of that, right? Maybe we can unban balance. Maybe like these like mono white like tax rack decks. It'll be fine. Look, it's just balance, right? Like I mean, sure they, couldn't abuse it or I just there's just not a lot of cards on there that make a lot of sense to unban for the most part. At least what we're looking at right now. Like no one's thinking, man, we need another format we can just span Brainstorm. Like I love playing Brainstorm, and I'm a little sad I can't play it in this format, but I mean it's banned for a reason. The card's obscene, right? So the ban list is good. There's not a lot of candidates for unbanning stuff. I mean, I think there's a couple. I guess we'll go over those. We have Bargain on the watch list, and I think that's why we have some of the weird stuff that's kind of like banned-ish, like for example, um, why Tendrils is banned, of course, is primarily because Bargain is unbanned, which is just, I mean, obviously, there's no other reason for Tendrils to be banned. But obviously, if you want to play with Bargain, you need to make some sort of concessions. Again, same reason why Show and Tell is banned is the same reason uh, why Tendrils is banned, because Bargain, duh. Um, so yeah, I think if you banned Bargain, you could unban like Tendrils, and you could play some sort of like Iggy Pop thing or whatever. That might be okay. Um, but I think the Iggy Pop decks from old from Legacy in like circa 2006 2007, pretty sure they played Infernal Tutor, so you'd probably have to change stuff up. I mean, obviously Ill-Gotten Gains is a pretty powerful card. Obviously works really well with a lot of rituals. Maybe you'd see some sort of Helm of Awakening, like eggs deck, like the Dark Water egg and Shadow Blood egg, those ones um, from Odyssey. So that might be a thing. I don't know. There's all sorts of different options, but I don't think. Yeah, if you banned Bargain, and you could probably unban Tendrils and it'd be okay. Um, I think it might, like I said, might even open up decks like maybe some sort of Iggy Pop kind of thing, maybe some sort of egg style deck. Not sure, but it would do something at least. And it doesn't seem like the bargain decks have. I haven't played it. I mostly just haven't done it because I don't feel like even though bargains aren't really that expensive, I don't really feel like picking a card that'll probably just be banned. It almost seems like that is kind of something that would happen. There's only like 4 bargain decks I think listed on TC decks in total. I mean, yeah, having to play stuff like Brain Freeze when Guy's Blessing is a card that's actually played a decent amount is kind of not fun. As well as like trying to play like the trick stuff with bargain. It's just like, oh, you got so many clunky cards. Like, ugh, I don't think that's really very good either. So I mean, maybe it is like maybe it is oppressive. I don't know. Ugh, but I don't really see it living that long. It just seems weird. It just seems weird that it's legal. Um, yeah, and it seems kind of weird being like, yeah, ban it. I don't know if it's really that good though, but um, whatever. I think I'd rather have like Tendrils than Bargain, and at least like have you know an actual sort of storm based combo deck instead of like this kind of weird one where you just have to do a bunch of stuff and jump through hoops, and I don't know. It doesn't feel very good. I guess I don't really have very good reasoning, but I think I'd rather have I think you could do more with tendrils than bargain. And so show and tell, kind of the same thing. I think is basically banned just because of bargain. Yeah, I don't really. I mean, what else are you supposed to show and tell? Like a symbiotic worm or something? Like Verdant Force? I mean, nothing really that broken. I mean, obviously you can play Oath, which is clearly better for the most part. Obviously, show and tell is better versus like control decks. With I should say control decks with few to no creatures. So something like land still. So yeah, I'm not. I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head. It doesn't really seem that broken. Doesn't seem that good. I guess you could put a Form of the Dragon in play. I don't know. I don't know. Seems like you could do though. Like if you had show and tell, you could play like a sneak and show deck, but that would be like I'm like okay, that's cool. I mean, you don't have Emrakul or Gristlebrand, so it's like a far cry. But the coolest thing you do would be like sneak attack, symbiotic worm, obviously, because then you get all the tokens after it dies, which is pretty great. Um, you show or sneak attack, show and tell like a Necroma, I guess, or no, would you probably just do Sarah Avatar? That kills faster, but that's a little bit harder to hit with. Not sure, but at least it'd probably be a deck. It'd probably be a deck. I don't think it'd be like that great of a deck though, but I could be wrong. Anyways, I think it'd be playable. Um, and then of course, I think Flash, again, like outside of flashing in a symbiotic worm, I mean, I'm not really sure what decks would play it. I don't think Reanimator would really play it. I mean, like I said, yeah, Flash symbiotic worm, that's great. Then it gives you, you know, puts in the graveyard, then you can reanimate it, which is cool. But I don't think there's really any combo stuff. Obviously the combo with Protean Hulk from that broken ass deck, that was a Dissension, I believe was when that was printed. Dissension? Yeah, I think. Um, so yeah, there's not really. I mean, again, it's just because you could flash in a Rector to get a bargain. Like that would be pretty ridiculous. So yeah. Um, oh well, I guess this is go for show and tell. Show and tell you could also play in the Reanimator to dodge graveyard hate, which is pretty good. Again, there's a little bit of danger there making that deck too good because it already feels pretty strong. But I mean, I don't know, maybe the format can handle it. Reanimator, like I said, probably my favorite deck because its mana base felt pretty good, but it was able to splash a bunch of colors. But it's mostly mono black for the most part. Um, yeah, so kind of hard to say, but that is a legitimate danger. Um, Other than that, show and tell probably make some decks. Flash, I don't know. I don't think there's any combos off the top of my head other than with Academy Rector into Form of the Dragon or what else? I mean, I guess you get Solitary Confinement, but there's already like a lot of ways to get Solitary Confinement. That doesn't really seem that good. I'm not 100% sure. So those probably come off. The only thing I see that's really not related to bargain and cheating the play and all that stuff would be Roll Gorger Dragon. Wool Gorger, pretty strong, pretty sweet. I have a list that I made up. I was like, ooh, I wonder if this would be pretty good. And it looks, well, maybe I should share it. I'm not sure. Maybe, well, anyways, it seems like it could come off. You don't have Into. You do have like Buried Alive. Ooh, excuse me. So you can actually have turn one kills pretty easily, like Swamp, Rit, Buried Alive, Animate Dead, and then obviously you get like Sliver Queen or Ambassador Loquatus, Wool Gorger, or Wool Gorger, Sliver Queen, Loquatus, I don't know, some combination thereof, and then you just make infinite mana, and then you target like the Sliver Queen or Ambassador Loquatus with the Animate Dead, and then you mill them for infinite, or just make Badrillion slivers. So that's always an option. That deck seems pretty good. It seems playable. Seems like a good combo deck. But I don't know. Like I don't. It doesn't seem like it'd be too much. But I haven't even play tested the deck against anything. I don't even have it built. I mean, because obviously War Gorge is banned, and I just like, well, why play test a card that's not even unbanned, but it seems kind of interesting. Seems like that might be if you're wanting to improve the combo decks, because like I said, those definitely feel like the archetypes that are the weakest. But again, combo decks you have to be extremely careful with because they can ruin a format faster than anything. So yeah, that's something to watch out for. So but yeah, Wargorger seems like it could be a decent deck. There's tons of graveyard hate. I mean, it dies to Blue Elemental Blast, that'll ruin it. Stifle ruins it. Disenchant ruins it. Crypt obviously ruins it. Uh, and sometimes if they have to go for Liquatus, obviously if you have Guy's Blessing in your deck, that'll ruin it because you can just sideboard like a Blessing, um, and everything gets shuffled back in. So that could be an issue. Yeah, so that seems kind of interesting, but everything else, like I said, oh that's right. I know people mentioned like Grim Monolith or whatever, but yeah, that seems like it'd just be too much with like the Phyrexian Devourer deck. I'd like to play with Grim Monolith, but yeah, with that Devourer deck, it can do so much with 3 mana, like first turn, like obviously, and then you have it's good with Voltaic Key, of course. You can untap the Monolith or whatever, and keys or Monolith itself is good for sacking the Tinker, just produces tons of mana. So you can go like turn one, like Ancient Tomb, Monolith, Key, and then like Altar, and then next turn drop a land, and then play Devour, and then sack it and mill them out, that kind of thing. So you get really fast openings. So yeah, that could be an issue. Monolith does seem like a problem. Obviously, of course, Monolith is again too good with Bargain. So yeah, Monolith seems suspect, even though it's a really fun card. So I don't think it would. I think it's the Devourer deck that would make it probably Monolith too good. I don't think it'd be too good in like the Tinker or Wildfire decks. Maybe, I'm not sure. But those decks seem pretty reasonable already, so I don't know. Could be a danger there too. But everything else, I mean, like we don't need Goblin Recruiter. We don't really need Necropotence, or Yawgmoth's Will. Like a lot of these cards are just like nonsensical to really have in the format. Um, I think there's probably a discussion about Vampiric Tutor, but I guess we should probably save that for another day. This is already going so long. But Vampiric Tutor, yeah, that'd be interesting to talk about. Anyways, so what's next? You can expect, of course, this is sort of natural order of things. Like you find people just making decks and then slowly refining lists. People discovering old decks, coming up with novel new decks, due to the unique card pool or just rules changes and stuff like that. Um, yeah, so that's pretty cool. Expect more refined lists, less click slither and goblins. I mean, that's just an insult. Like, why would you? Why what the deck doesn't have enough 4 drops for you? Christ's sake. Um, yeah, so I think you'll see a lot of the weird stuff, cute stuff get trimmed. Um, I mean, it's the format isn't casual, um, but it's not like a super mega competitive format. People a lot of times like people just want to play it because it's fun. These are old cards that they had fun with. So I mean that's definitely like obviously that's a legitimate thing because it's not like you're playing for pro points or planeswalker points or Magic Arena streaming points or whatever the hell it is now, which I guess we don't even know how you even qualify for things. But yeah, there's no real like not a ton of money on the line, so to speak. But people are innovating, of course. But there's just people that are just in it for fun. Will just play random stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is totally cool. So I don't shit on people for that. They're just playing random stuff for that. I mean, shit, I love Click Slither, but don't put in your Goblin list. Oh, that's just not a good card. It's not a good card to play in that deck, or any deck really, unless you're playing like Insect Tribal. Oh yeah, that's the way to do it. Um, so yeah, you still have people just doing fun stuff, which is fine, of course. I like to play fun stuff too. Um, God, who doesn't want to play Pox, right? Everyone loves Pox. That deck's so sweet. Or Cabal Coffers, or freaking Intuko Shade. Man, those cards are sweet. But Anyway, so I expect to see more brewing. Definitely a couple interesting decks like the I mentioned the Green White Oath land tax deck, or the Phyrexian Devourer combo deck. Um, Stuff like that will definitely pop up. There's always interesting stuff, which I really like. All sorts of cool things, man. You get like these old like standard decks or block decks even going against all these other random decks and new decks, and oh boy, it's so cool. So I really like that. So I expect to see a lot more brewing, which is great. So everything's still in flux, and I imagine it'll still be like that, maybe even like a year from now. But we'll see. We'll see. Uh, I mean, the format's pretty popular, so I mean, at least among the people who play it, they're pretty rabid about it. So, and I think what you see is like the best performing decks are the most consistent. And I call this sort of like the Black Vice test, sort of like, oh man, Black Vice is really powerful, but it's also fucking garbage half the time. Like you draw it on turn 5, and it's like it does like nothing, right? Um, so that's kind of the thing I think where you have these decks that are like, oh, you have some really powerful stuff, like a lot of combo decks where like, oh, you draw the right pieces and everything comes together, but um, you don't. I can't imagine you'll really see like a ton of multicolor decks do really well just because Wasteland is all over the place. And there's a lot of really good non-basic hate, even if people aren't even playing it, losing to your own mana base because of, you drew too many Painlands or City of Brass or whatever. Even against like mid-range decks, that'll add up. Um, so yeah, that's a big problem. So you definitely see, with some exceptions, of course, basically two-color decks, especially two-color allied color decks, where you can play like fetch lands and the pain lands, whereas enemy color decks can only play like the enemy colored pain lands. Again, exceptions to this because, for example, like Astral Slide can play like cycling lands. They play a lot more lands, um, and so that gives them a little bit easier. You can cycle to more lands and stuff like that. So you don't quite have that issue. Land tax decks can flash another color pretty easily because, well, they're playing land tax, and Mox Diamond typically too, as well as any green multicolor deck can play stuff like, for example, like Yavimaya Elder or Bird's Paradise primarily. Again, so there's a little bit of leeway there, but typically less colors is better, makes your deck more consistent, and just decks that do the same thing pretty consistently are good. Just again, like I said, I'll say it a million times, like the reason why Sly and Goblins and Landstill are good because they just do the same things pretty much all the time. You don't have to, the deck doesn't have like a fail rate outside of like not drawing enough lands or something, like you just getting mana screwed or whatever, just weird stuff that happens to every deck. Um, Whereas like a lot of other decks with a lot more moving parts, that's a problem. Especially since we don't really have Brainstorm and Ponder and Preordain and stuff like that to really just fix our draws and make everything like good. Um, so yeah. So I imagine the trend of these fair decks basically doing better because most of the combo decks really don't seem to be that good. They're a little bit worse. They have a problem dealing with hate. Not that they can't, it's just a lot harder. They have more moving parts. They're more likely to fail. And especially these multicolor combo decks that are just like, oh no, please, please don't wasteland me, bro. Expect to see more tournaments, obviously, especially since people know about it, and it definitely seems like just more and more people are coming on. Like to the Discord, there's always just people getting into the format, becoming interested, and so that's really great. I think the format has like a particular niche, you know, uh, because it fills a niche of playing these old cards, and not a lot of them are good today. I mean, they were printed like Fact or Fiction and Modern, but I mean, it's such a different format, and it lacks a lot of the control tools that we even have in Premodern. So, yeah. Um, it gives you a place to play all these old stuff like Jackal Pup and Ball Lightning and stuff like that. Um, it's cool. It's fun. It's nice to play with just all old bordered cards. That's so sweet. You get to play all sorts of different kinds of decks. I mean, pretty much everything is viable. I mean, like I said, I don't think like I played a bajillion decks, probably like 20 decks or so at this point, and it doesn't feel like there's like that big of a difference between the best deck and the worst deck. So Yeah, there's definitely an organic demand for this. I think there are just a lot of reasons to play the format, and it's got a lot of nostalgia, so that's cool. So it's not forced. It's not going to be like, you know, like I don't know, what was that one uh, format that was kind of a thing for a second and then not? Was it like Frontier or something? Yeah, it won't be like that. Yeah, it'll be good, and it's kind of like it's closed off too. Like obviously has this is the start, fourth edition and Ice Ages or whatever, and then this is the end at Judgment, or excuse me, not Judgment, but Scourge. So you don't have to really, once you get the cards, you don't have to buy any more, which is kind of nice. So it fulfills a niche. So yeah, that's it'll probably definitely stick around for quite some time, I think. I'm guessing it'll probably end up kind of being solved at some point, but I don't think that really matters too much. I mean, that's fine if it's solved, um, but it's there's so much space to brew, and there's always like, and I've been thinking about this format so much this last like year or so. I even came up with a couple decks myself, or basically just ported old decks to Premodern, so it's not like I can really take much credit for that. But it's definitely interesting. There's a lot of different decks, so it's not like old school where I think pretty much the best deck is just like the deck or keeper or whatever you want to call it. And then everything else is just kind of like people just don't really play it that much because, like it's just not that fun or whatever. It's just like, oh, well, this is the best deck, whatever. Um, so it's a little bit different from that, where it's like there's just nothing that's really the clear best, I don't think, at least at this point in time. So, gosh, I've been going on so long. I guess that's basically it. Um, yeah, format's doing good. Seems to be growing. Seems to be pretty fun. Um, Definitely, like I said, they could do a little bit of trimming around with the band list a little bit. I wish I could play Necro, but I mean that's not probably very reasonable with Dark Ritual, Lotus Petal, Lion, not not really Lion's Eye Diamond, but Mox Diamond. Um, that's just it's not gonna happen. I guess Cabal Ritual too. So that sucks, but yeah, yeah, no biggie, no biggie. Format looks good. Format looks healthy, and not much more to say than that. I guess you should stop. This is like 50 something minutes at this point. So, um, yeah, yeah. So looking good. Everything's looking good. Looking fun. Looking sweet. Always look forward to new pre-modern tournaments. Look at all the tournament coverage and all the different decks and stuff. It's good stuff, man. Good stuff. So that's it. Thanks for stopping by, guys. Thanks for listening all the way to the end, or even just 7 minutes or whatever, 10 minutes, not even that long. That's okay. If it interests you, that's good. So, thanks for stopping by, guys, and have a nice day.